Welcome, everybody, to the first video edition of the GAMEOLOGY podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Matthew Falvey, and this is...
Attila Gabriel Braninsky.
That's right. On episode 31, we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda, the evolution of Zelda. This is a series that's been going on since 1986. We're about to have the newest version drop on March 3rd on both the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. A lot of people at Nintendo are saying this is a sort of a throwback to the original Zelda games, sort of the idea of the first Zelda, that openness, but now fully realized. And they even did a really cool trick with imitating some of the artwork that was found in the first manual, but showing that in-game engine of Link standing on top of a hill and looking out at the mountains. So, Attila, why did you pick this topic?
So, when I was hearing about a lot of the promotional stuff for Breath of the Wild, specifically the way that they were focusing on having shrines in the world instead of temples. Not that there won't necessarily be temples as well, but just the design decisions that the Legend of Zelda franchise has been making have been really interesting, because anytime you've got this massive, long-running franchise, you've got to wonder how it is that they're able to keep going and maintain such interest in the series, make every game feel like incredible but different from one another. I'd say more than most franchises, the Legend of Zelda games have really, there's the sort of core aspects of what you would refer to as a Zelda game that have changed over time. Or rather, there's some things that haven't changed. Those are the things that make the game feel like a Legend of Zelda title. But in general, there's the sort of the surface level details, the locales, those are the things that change, and yet it still feels like Zelda. It still feels like one of the, experiences that so many gamers look forward to playing after all these years.
Yeah, I would say, let's talk about what makes a Zelda feel like a Zelda. You've got a lone adventurer. Usually doesn't have too much help, although the later games brought in more of that help more directly, where the earlier games you would find villagers and they would give you sort of cryptic clues. And it's about dungeons and temples and making your way towards a final enemy and collecting pieces along the way. And then different items from each of the dungeons that either help you solve puzzles, defeat a boss in that dungeon, or help you out later on. I think the biggest change when they went, especially from the very first Zelda and A Link to the Past, we won't talk so much about number 2, Link's The Adventure of Link, which was quite a lot different, is when you went from that 2D style to the 3D, Nintendo was smart. They've always worked well within their limitations. They knew that the 3D world would be a little more difficult to navigate for people, especially when this could have been their very first 3D game. So they took the emphasis off the fast-paced arcade action of the first Zelda and A Link to the Past, where at times that game was almost like bullet hell. There were enemies on every screen. You were always in danger, and there were a lot of projectiles flying at you. In the 3D Zeldas, it was slowed down, a lot of more one-on-one duels, which is actually similar to Zelda 2's style. And it was more about puzzles and using the 3D space to paint these dungeons in a way that you could see the solution visually, look around your space. I always, when I imagine or look back on playing like Ocarina of Time, I think of entering a dungeon and just taking a look. And that sort of, usually the dungeon music is a little more ambient, a little slower, whereas the first Zeldas were like, go, go, go. You got a lot of enemies to defeat here. But the 3D Zeldas were all about taking it in, the ambience of it, maybe a torch crackling off in the distance, and trying to figure out, how do I get through this dungeon and into the next room?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting the way that between the very first game, right? So where you have absolutely no direction other than these, as you said, the sort of cryptic hints that you get from occasional people that, in all honesty, a lot of them were hidden behind walls or hidden away in trees you had to burn down to find entrances to stuff. The hints were practically as hidden as the temple and dungeon entrances themselves. So it made for a game where there was so much trial and error, and where having a map like the map that was published in the original Nintendo Power made it incredibly useful to have that for a game as grand in scale as the original Legend of Zelda. And it was a game that you could, I think a lot of people really enjoyed that feeling of not being told where to go, that they could just explore the different like parts of the world. But then when Link to the Past came along, there was much more sort of structure to the world. There were a lot more NPCs to tell you things, NPCs in much more obvious locations like Kakariko Village and that sort of thing, sort of help guide players along. And then in the 3D Legend of Zelda, as you mentioned in Ocarina of Time, they added Navi as a sort of helper character, and I think that's really the first time you've had. I mean, there was Sahasrara, probably butchering the pronunciation of that, in Link to the Past, as the sort of recurring, like, give you information character. But now a quote-unquote helper character has been a staple of the Legend of Zelda 3D games between Navi, King of Red Lions, Midna, and then Fi. Although it seems now that in Breath of the Wild, they're actually not going to have a direct helper character.
Yeah, so they're getting back to the roots in that way. I think Navi was a really interesting choice because she could move. She was in the environment with you, and she could actually visually take a highlighter right to the spot you needed to go and say, look at this. There was a lot of that look and listen.
Yeah.
It was very simple. It was really well done, and I think it helped because, I mean, that game came out 2 years after 3D gaming hit the console market, and they did a great job. Nintendo did a great job with Mario, slowly walking you through how to play in a 3D space, and Zelda was that game still holds up going back to it now. And you have more experience with, say, Midna, and who's the sort of space anamorphic David Bowie creature that's in, what is it, Skyward Sword?
Fi.
Okay. I haven't played Skyward Sword, but I've watched some videos critiquing this, and I've heard you talk about it. And the problem with Fi is that it's like there's hand-holding, and there's like explaining the same thing that was just shown in a text box.
Yep.
Just in case you didn't read it. It's like they took that way too far, and I think that this is them bouncing all the way back.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think that when Navi was introduced to Ocarina of Time, I'm willing to bet, as much as having a fairy was made part of the story in the early game, like the boy without a fairy, I'm willing to bet Navi was included in the game sometime after initial development and playtesting. I'm willing to bet that having this character who like physically floated around you, and like the concept of lock-on targeting was kind of new in that time. So having an arrow above an enemy, like pointing out like this is the guy that you're attacking right now, having Navi actually fly out and be this visual indicator of like this is who you're attacking right now, probably helped to make the connection a bit better in people's minds. And since then, afterwards it wasn't necessary. So it's not like the King of Red Lions shows up in Wind Waker to like point stuff out. I'd say Wind Waker did a good job of having a character who wasn't too handholdy, like the King of Red Lions was there to sort of guide you through, but he didn't constantly interfere with what you were doing. And it didn't feel as handholdy as Fi ended up being in Skyward Sword, where not only is she telling you what to do, but she's being redundant about it as well. And it was the redundancy that was painful. It was like a giant tentacle bursts out in front of you, and like then she says, "Warning, danger." It's like I could have pieced together that the giant tentacle was dangerous. You didn't need to tell me that. And then I think my favorite companion character was definitely Midna, just in terms of the way she would, quote unquote, like suggest help to the player was done in this kind of snarky way. Made it seem like she was talking down to you a little, as in like, oh, come on, how can't you figure this out? And it didn't make it feel like the game was babying you in a sense. And I guess that's probably not something that everyone liked. Goodness knows they spend the entire plot of Skyward Sword talking down to the player, and I hated that. But having the companion character point stuff out to you in a way that's like, oh, look, isn't this so obvious? It made it feel a bit more like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't it's sort of hard to quantify exactly why that was more interesting. But again, it might just be in line with my own personal preferences.
I think Nintendo at that time with Zelda on the Wii was straddling the line of who are we making this game for and trying to make it for both people. And in the way that Midna felt like a core gamer who doesn't want a tutorial was giving the tutorial.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually.
And then I think with Skyward Sword, maybe because the Zelda games haven't sold extremely well. The Ocarina of Time did.
Yeah.
In terms of percentage of the install base, it had about like a third or more of the people who owned an N64 had Ocarina of Time. But the percentage of Wii owners that had the Zelda games was actually pretty small in comparison to how many people bought these things. So I think they might have been looking at those numbers and thought, well, let's make the Skyward Sword even more handholdy just in case. And that, I think, they just went too far. And I think they've recognized that. And Breath of the Wild is going back to that feel of, I was talking about this today with a friend, and I said I was looking forward to playing this game at the same time as him and you and whoever, because this game, I got a feeling Breath of the Wild is not going to be that linear in a way. Because
no, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, it's a very open place. The other Zelda games, there's a very strict order in the dungeons. The first Zelda, you can't get lost, but if you end up in a spot where it's too powerful, you're going to be sent back to the beginning, and you're probably going to go to an easier spot. But in the other 3D Zeldas, it was very, very ordered. But this one, I got a feeling that you and me, a week later, we could check in after playing this game and be like,
we're going to have completely different experiences.
Yeah, I went this way, you went that way. What's what are those shrines like? And it's going to bring, I think Miyamoto, he said that he loved the idea of the first Zelda, people talking about it. And I remember my friend told me when he was growing up, his mom used to play the first Zelda and would talk to the other moms about how to get into this spot. And Nintendo likes that. They don't want you to be online looking up facts. They want you in real life, eye to eye, like 1-2 switch, discussing how to beat a Zelda game.
Yeah, I think it's like the most interesting thing to me is looking at going from Twilight Princess through Skyward Sword and can't forget A Link Between Worlds, and then Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
And I just bumped the mic. That probably made a loud noise. Anyway, just the reason I call attention to those 4 games, because they're chronologically, they're the closest together. Like Twilight Princess was practically beat for beat very similar to the way Ocarina of Time was. Just in terms of like, it's a game where you do some stuff in the overworld, then you enter a dungeon, you defeat the dungeon, you get an item, you collect the shards of the dark, I'm forgetting it now, it's the things that Midnight was looking for, and then you collect the shards of the mirror. I remember that part at least. And that's all sort of like the classic Zelda formula of like form together the pieces of something and then go defeat the big bad. That's formula wise, it's very similar to Ocarina of Time, and it just felt that, or even Wind Waker before it. Like both of those games felt like it's what people expected Zelda to be after Ocarina of Time. Like Nintendo. Quite rightly felt that the response to Ocarina of Time was so good that at least the shadow it cast, I guess you could say, in over Wind Waker and Twilight Princess was so significant that both of those games felt very similar. Like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, of course, Wind Waker, and then Twilight Princess all felt like very similar games. And then it was only by the time we got to Skyward Sword where things started changing, where now you had like a stamina meter, and that was something that I don't know if it's been in any other Zelda title. Like maybe some of the I don't know if Oracle of Ages or Oracle Seasons or any of the DS games had anything like that, but it was the first time where I looked at my sister's playing through Twilight Princess now, and I was watching her climb a set of vines, and Link is like going up the vines one grid space at a time, and it's really slow and grueling. And then in Skyward Sword, they said, okay, well, you have the stamina meter, you can flick the remote to have him like jump up the vines in much faster time increments. But of course, then you'll exhaust yourself, and you have the potential of falling off the vines. And then in Link Between Worlds, they took the stamina meter a little bit further, and they said that Link's physical actions are no longer limited by stamina, but your item usage is. So now you don't even have to worry about enemies dropping bows or I should say arrows and bombs and other sort of items that you physically could not complete an area without having these items. Because everything's now tied to an energy system, you just know that you can't fire more than X amount of arrows in a given span of time. You have to you're guaranteed to have these items if you need them to solve a puzzle. That's the best thing that it guarantees using the energy system. But then the fact that when you're designing combat, in Wind Waker, it was really easy to just pull out your quiver of 99 arrows and shoot enemies in the face and instant kill them because you have lock-on targeting. By the fact that they've now said that you can fire no more than 3 arrows within this span of time, it means that enemies that are dispatched with bows, you have to fire an arrow, wait for it to recharge, fire an arrow, wait for it to recharge, or whatever. And that if they introduce too many enemies of the same type at a given time, you have to switch up your tactics, and that makes it easier to design more tightly knit combat encounters where the player has to think more strategically about their actions. They can't just empty a quiver of 99 arrows to solve every problem.
It's interesting to think that Skyward... See, I hadn't played it, so I didn't have this perspective that they had added some of the stamina meters, which seems to be the jumping off point to what they're doing with Breath of the Wild, taking it into more of a survival game. I'm watching some of the gameplay stuff. You're looking at it about temperature. It's all about crafting and building and surviving in this world in the way that the first Zelda game had you exploring a world on your own, discovering things that way, but they just didn't have any of the mechanics in place for it to be more of a survival game. What's that?
No, I was gonna say I'm agreeing. Yeah.
The one thing I'm a little worried about is that what I haven't liked in previous Zelda games is the collecting and the backtracking, and I'm a little worried that Breath of the Wild might be highlighting that area of it. I have a lot of faith in Nintendo. If that is the main focus of the game, they're going to find a way to make that fun. Perhaps just the crafting element and picking up loot is going to, and the progression is going to instill all of that with a lot of fun. And if the shrines are all different in a way, I think that's going to be a lot different than just go to this area, pick up this piece, go to this area, pick up this piece. Yeah. But I think they're walking a thin line, and they could be taking that into the dangerous territory of not focusing on what people really liked about Zelda, having lots of temples, and instead going for... It could be a lot of collecting. Are they going to be able to instill enough variety and uniqueness in these shrines to make the game feel alive?
See, this is what inspired me to talk about this whole subject in the first place, is that the fact that they're moving away from temples and going towards shrines now, or at least that more of the game is going to be about finding these shrines. I think there's over 100, 150 of them. There's a lot. They didn't even say the exact number because I guess they want players to find out how many shrines there are. And the thing that struck me was the most interesting design decision of why are there more shrines? Why is this more of a thing that we can expect to find in the environment? And I think the conclusion that I came to is because they want to separate the sort of puzzle-solving dungeon gameplay and the overworld exploration gameplay. They want that to happen a bit more frequently. Because let's taking Twilight Princess as an example. You would spend a whole bunch of time in the overworld. You've played Twilight Princess, right?
The first quarter.
Okay, but if I'll fill you in and anyone else who's listening. Basically, you would spend a bunch of time in the overworld collecting these tears from a light spirit who's been sort of diminished in its life force, and going around the overworld, picking up all these tears, replenishing the life spirit, solving problems in the overworld that felt very distinct from when you actually got into a temple, and then it was like all about the puzzle solving and the intricacies of going between rooms and collecting keys, and like being the gameplay that takes place inside of a temple versus outside of a temple is very significant. Skyward Sword carried that forward. The gameplay experience of being outside a temple, getting all the requisites to get into it, felt very different. So what they're doing now effectively by having these shrines and having much more of them dotted around the world means that you're going to do like 10 minutes of exploration, 10 minutes of being in a shrine, 10 minutes more of exploration, 10 minutes more of being in a shrine. So you're getting much more like little bite-sized experiences of the puzzle solving. It keeps the gameplay feeling more engaging because it's not just a whole lot of this and then a whole lot of that. Now it's actually sort of broken up, and there's a bit more variety in your experience.
Yeah, and I think in a large game like that, I'm sure anyone who's played a Zelda game has gotten to a point where they're stuck on a dungeon. And in a more linear Zelda game, there's no real choice. I mean, you could hop out and maybe go fishing or something and hop back in. But this allows you to maybe leave a dungeon that's particularly challenging. And
you can always come back to the shrine later.
Yeah. So, but I'm talking about if you left, like, say, a big temple, that was a big problem. And then you could maybe go do some shrines or other stuff that still feels a bit more productive, but moving forward in a different path. And who knows, maybe, I don't know how the upgrade system works, but maybe doing a couple of those shrines could help you do another dungeon later on. Or maybe the shrine is giving you a problem, you can go to another one. You can just keep on moving on. And for a game this size, I think you do need, they're talking about how big the map is. I know it's 12 times bigger than this Zelda game and all that. So so although 100 shrines sounds like a lot, if you didn't have it, you might end up with some of the problems of Wind Waker, where you had, and even Skyward Sword, we had these vast maps, but there really wasn't much to do. And I
think that the number of shrines and just like things and points of interest that they're populating the map with in this game are in direct response to the previous game, because Wind Waker had at least one island per grid square, and every island had something that was populated. A lot of them were, a lot of them were not populated, but every one of them had like a piece of heart or something significant that you could find and do and accomplish something, and that felt really cool because it rewarded your sense of exploration. In Skyward Sword, having played through the entire game, unless there was something actively important or like a reason to go to a specific place in the sky, there was no point in flying around. There was no point in doing any of that exploration, because you find a tiny like floating circle of rock in the sky, and it just doesn't, like, there's nothing interesting or engaging about that.
And that's the thing, is people want to have some sort of progress. I guess I was a bit harsh on Wind Waker. I mean, if they do have something that is at least filling up the life bar in a way to make it feel like, all right, that was worth your 20 minutes or your half an hour checking out this area. So I guess we'll be looking for Breath of the Wild to be doing something of the same. I'm sure they're not going to be able to come up with unique items in 100 different shrines. There's not going to be 100 different types of boomerangs, but they'll have to go with something of like, this severely powers up your health or your damage output.
This is the interesting thing about recording this podcast before the game comes out, is like I'm sort of I'm rather confident in my reasoning about why they decided to have shrines instead of more focus on temples, but what I'm not sure about is what are the rewards in these shrines? Do you have to complete a certain number of them? Are they giving you pieces towards something greater, or are they giving you like upgrade items? Because I know like weapon crafting is a big thing in this game, or like finding weapons and using them, and then they break and you get new ones. So are shrines going to have weapons? Because that would be kind of odd, since they're effectively consumable. Like, a weapon will break after you use it, so it doesn't seem like that's a good thing to get as a reward for completing a shrine. Now, there might be like weapons in the shrine, but it's not the ultimate reward for completing the shrine. So it'll be interesting to see, like, obviously the very first couple shrines you tackle on the plateau, like the starting area of the game, are where you get the powers for your Sheikah Slate, which are your like bombs, your like magnetism, like all these super important powers that you're going to be using as puzzle solving elements in future shrines. So those are essentially obligatory. Like, you have to go to those shrines and get those powers. And then the game opens up from there. Like, they say you can jump off the plateau in any direction you choose and just go. So it'll be interesting to see, because I criticized Link Between Worlds before about having a game that was a bit too open, and then you hit the dark world in that game, which was a sort of halfway point, and then suddenly all the enemies are so much more difficult that the player experiences the ridiculous like spike in difficulty. So it'll be interesting to see if the shrines are engaging enough so that when you encounter them early in the game, are they too difficult? And then when you encounter them in the late part of the game, are they too easy? Have they been able to strike enough of a balance that like getting to a shrine, like maybe they'll tackle it as part of the environmental design. Maybe they'll say that like the shrines that are easy to get to are easy to beat, and the shrines that are hard to get to are hard to beat. That seems to make the most sense to me.
Yeah, just having a gating way of either difficult enemies that could block the path to know that you're sufficiently powered up, requiring a certain item. I think when you have 100 shrines, that could be, not all of them are going to be completely accessible.
Mm-hmm.
But a vast majority of them, I would imagine, are going to be in this open world and are accessible enough. You probably couldn't have too many specific items of reward, because Nintendo has to plan that people are going to be approaching these in an uncontrolled order,
linear fashion. Yeah.
So if you could go with a lot of more like universal upgrades and things that aren't going to grant specific. But who knows? I mean, that could be like, it could be really interesting to have a random shrine put out a much more powerful item. I mean, that's what we see with loot crates and gambling. Why that works so well is that you don't know. It's not every 10 loot crates you're going to get a great one. The point of it is that you don't know what's going to be in the loot crate. So if maybe a random shrine has something much more powerful, I don't think it could have anything that is required to progress too much further in the game. I think they're going to have to be more universal items.
Yeah, I think that the items that you get in the initial shrines are the ones that are going to be the required items. So that basically, like, really early in this game, you're going to get the majority of the tools that you need to solve the majority of the puzzles, which I think is fantastic, because that just means that throughout the game, they don't have to worry about designing puzzles where the nature of the puzzles that they can construct are limited by the set of tools the player has to work with. Because now if they start the game and super early on, the player has this huge tool set that they can draw on all the different Sheikah Slate powers. That means that the nature of the puzzles they can construct are much more varied, because now you can draw upon 1 or 2 or 3 different powers within a single shrine. And the way you have to approach these problems, like looking around, investigating your surroundings, and being like, okay, I need to use power A to solve that, then I need to switch over to power B to get past this obstacle. And just it'll just mean that there's more variety in the design of the shrines, and that the puzzle solving won't feel like just retreading the same ground or just using the same item nonstop to solve all your problems within one span of the game, because that was sort of how the items worked in the original Legend of Zelda games, was that you would get an item in a dungeon, and you would use that item extensively in that dungeon to solve the like latter half of the dungeon, and then you would almost never, or at least like very little, would you ever have to use that item in dungeons to come. It depended on what the item was. Like the ball and chain was a big part of the ice mansion in Twilight Princess, but then you didn't really need to use the ball and chain anywhere else in the game after that.
Yeah, that definitely could open it up. It'll be just such a different set of parameters for them when they're designing these shrines they have to think of it as like the player could be coming to them in almost any state. Again, we're talking about this before the game is out, so who knows how it is gated off and how you're going to approach them, but it's definitely interesting, and it's a lot different. And I think it's definitely been time for Zelda to take a much larger step forward from
and then
the 3D model.
Absolutely, and it just what I wanted to sort of bring to light in this podcast was like not only are some of these changes like really intriguing and really looking forward to a lot of them, but they've had subtle roots in like the way that the Zelda games have been changing over the past few that have come out. Like the introduction of the stamina meter in Skyward Sword, the introduction of that stamina meter as applying to items in Link Between Worlds. Just all these changes really come to light in Breath of the Wild, but they're all elements that the games it's sort of like the natural progression of where everything's been going. Um, Aside from a little bit of DNA from what looks to be Shadow of the Colossus in terms of some of the encounters with large enemies, like actually being able to climb up on top of them and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how the things that are actually new to this game and the way that so some of the things that are actually new, some of the things that are improved upon or tweaked mechanics from previous games, and then what remains the same. And it'll be an interesting mix. I think everything we've seen about the game so far has led me to believe that like the way they've tuned these mechanics, the new, the tweaked, and the existing all seem to sync up really nicely and coalesce in a way that certainly makes it look like a really interesting gameplay experience. But I guess we'll find out.
We
Looking
will.
forward to it.
Was there anything else you wanted to touch on in terms of the evolution of the franchise?
That's about it as far as my thoughts are right now.
There you go. Very excited to play it. Are you going to be grabbing this on day one?
Yeah, did you manage to pre-order a Switch? Because I didn't.
No, I haven't pre-ordered a Switch. I actually had sold my Wii U in anticipation of the Switch, looked at the Switch's launch lineup, and thought, I'm going to go buy a Wii U again. And I got an incredible deal, and I'm just going to play it right on the Wii U. And then once Mario Odyssey or another interesting game comes up for the Switch, I'll probably wait a bit to grab it there.
I am going to be getting it for the Switch, and that means that I got to wake up in the morning and go line up at a Best Buy or something.
Oh, Lord. Good luck.
Thank you. I'll need it.
All right, everybody. That has been episode 31 of Gameology. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to be talking about game feel.
That's right.
And by next week, I mean in the next 2 weeks. So I'm Matt. You can find me on Twitter at GameThinkTalk.
And I've been your other host, Attila. Gabriel Brzezinski. You can find me on Twitter at BluishGreenPro or check out my website, bluishgreenproductions.com.
Bye, everybody.